Back here at Ace and Vine, which is one of my favorite spots to play poker in Northern California. Before jumping into the hands though, if you're interested in a free chance to play in a WSOP event, please make sure to check out my last video. For this one, I buy in for 500 playing a 2-3 no limit meetup game, and in the first significant hand, I pick up Beauty and the Beast offsuit and raise to 15 from middle position after under the gun limps. Big blind and under the gun call, and we go 3 ways to Queen 7-4 with a diamond draw. Checks to me, and I c-bet 20 with top pair, second best kicker. Only under the gun calls, and we go heads up to the 4 of clubs on the turn. Should be a relative blank as I don't expect my opponent to have too many 4s, especially given that he can't have 4x of clubs, which would have been a reasonable continue on the flop with bottom pair and a backdoor flush draw. After under the gun checks, I continue with another value bet, this time for 60, and he fairly quickly folds. I show the top pair, and after a winning start in this no limit game, I then get dealt the speed limit. There's a hijack straddle to 7 and it's Mississippi style, so action starts to the left of the straddler. Big blind calls and I raise to 35 from under the gun. Under the gun 1 in middle position call, and we go 3 ways to a flop in which I find bottom set on King 10-5 rainbow. I c-bet 50 and both players call. 4th street comes a 3 of diamonds putting up a backdoor flush draw, and with my opponents having 350 and 200 left respectively, I decide to rip. Under the gun 1 pretty quickly calls and middle position folds. It ends up being a rough spot for my opponent who has ace-king offsuit. The river is an inconsequential 8, and I scoop a pretty decent sized pot, to which some of that run good gets rightfully spread across the table via some adult beverages. Shortly after, I raise to 15 from middle position with Queen 9 of diamonds. Low jack, who's the same opponent from the previous hand, repops a 30. Big blind and I call, and the flop comes King Jack 10 rainbow giving me the second nuts. Checks to the low jack who fires 30, big blind folds, and on a board that favors my opponent, I'm going to have fewer raises, and that's no exception here as I decide to flat with plans for future street aggression. The turn comes to ace of hearts, and that unfortunately changes my plans a bit, in that while I improve to the nuts, my hand loses some deception. I check, and low jack continues with the betting for 45. Feels like we're either chopping or he has a hand like 2 pair or set. My hand does benefit from raising for denial, but in an effort to try to maintain whatever disguise is left, I just call, and the river comes a board pairing king. Pretty bad card as it now feels like the best case scenario is that we're chopping. That said, I decide to put out a block bet of 40 to just try and get to showdown. My opponent doesn't raise, so that's good news as he puts in calling chips and tables. Ace queen offsuit.
I gotta raise you on the flop.
Yeah, I wish you would.
I had a bad feeling. So yeah, got incredibly lucky on the turn to chop this one up, but that doesn't stop me from raising it up with suited gappers, this time with 8-10 of hearts from the hijack. There's a button straddle to 6, low jack calls, and I raise to 35. I pick up 3 callers and we go 4 ways to Queen 8 deuce, all red and giving me middle pair and backdoor possibilities. Low jack checks, and I put out a continuation bet of 70. And well, all 3 opponents are non-believers as they call, and we continue 4 ways to the turn, which comes a 4 of hearts giving me a backdoor flush draw. It's one of the better cards that I can ask for, and when it checks to me with 2 opponents left to act, I don't think I can bank on both of them checking back. This would mean that I'd either have to fold to a bet or call to try and realize. The option that I like better is to capitalize on the equity that I do have and continue with the aggressive action. That's what I decided to do as I rip, and only the cutoff calls off for roughly 300. Feels like I'm probably behind against a queen, so needing some help we go to a river which comes a red 3. But it's not a heart, unfortunately. The cutoff table is a monstrous king queen of diamonds to scoop this one, and I'm happy for my opponent Robert as he was the same guy that lost with the ace king earlier. And with red cards not working out, I give blackjacks a try in this next one. Under the gun raises to 15, the next 2 players call, and a 3 bet to 60 from the low jack. Only under the gun calls, and we go heads up to 8-6-6 with 2 dimes and a heart. Under the gun looks to reclaim the aggression by leading for 60. Feels like the best play is to flat and evaluate, as I am a bit concerned that my opponent may have a strong and potentially better hand than jacks. I put in the 60 and force you comes a queen of clubs. Kind of a bad card as I now lose to some flush draws that improve to top pair, and my opponent doesn't slow down and tries to school me with a calculated bet of 101. And well, he's Asian as am I, and I'm not going to fail this math test as I fold. This pot goes to my opponent who was nice enough to show the Queen of Hearts. Glad to have made a disciplined laydown, and not too long after I get dealt another premium Ace King offsuit from under the gun 1. Cutoff straddles to 8, the blinds call, and I raise to 40. Cutoff and small blind call, and the flop comes Ace Queen 10 rainbow. Small blind checks, I see bet 40, and cutoff increases the price to 140. Small blind folds, and with 380 total, it feels like a spot to just get it in. It is debatable as to whether I can get called by a weaker hand, but folding with my stack doesn't seem great, and while calling is reasonable, I run the risk of some action killing turns. That said, I rip for 380 effective, and my opponent shows the ace of spades, and correctly makes the laydown. I then move over to the second table and play one of the more interesting hands of the session, holding king 6 of diamonds. Low jack raises to 15, I call, and the blinds call as well. We go 4 ways to queen 7 deuce with 2 diamonds and a club, giving me the second nut flush draw. Checks to the low jack who bets 30 off a stack of roughly 110. Just about never folding here, and in an effort to plan ahead, I'm in raise to 60, which will allow me to reopen the pot should the in-between players call and the low jack jams. And well, that is what happens as the small blind calls to 60, big blind folds, and low jack goes all in for 111 effective. Since that amount is a valid raise, I can go over the top and put small blind in a tough spot. With him calling the initial 60, I am concerned that he could be trapping with 7s or deuces, but it's also possible that he has a pair plus flush draw, or even the nut flush draw. Looking to get the latter hands to fold, I rejam for small blinds roughly 450 effective. It too looks like the small blind was trying to plan ahead, as he's not convinced that I'm able to reopen the pot. We end up calling the floor to get clarification, to which it's confirmed that the rejam is valid. Small blind then goes through something that men don't envy and should give women more credit for, as he experiences a painful period of tanking. It's at this time that I surmise that small blind likely has the nut flush draw, so I'm hoping for a fold, which seems to be the direction that he's leaning towards. But he decides to put in the money instead.
Do you have enough flush draw? I'm in trouble then.
You got aces?
No, I have a diamond draw as well.
Square up the main pot first, guys. 111.
Do you have a pair with it?
No.
Are you good? Are
You have like ace jack?
You're good?
It does end up being the worst case scenario, as I'm up against low jack's ace queen of hearts and small blind's ace jack of diamonds. No worries though, as I spike a miracle king on the turn to give me the lead, and just need to fade the river which comes, the 10 of clubs giving small blind the winning hand. And just like an expensive visit to certain clubs on Broadway in San Francisco, of which I don't have an experience by the way, there's a bit of excitement in this one, but it ultimately concludes with an unhappy ending. Shout out to Oscar who took this one down though. He's an up and coming poker player who Ace and Vine needs to double check his ID next time, so that he doesn't lock it up against me again. But with king 6 not working out, I give another set of rags a try, with jack deuce of spades from the big blind. I reload for 500 more, and after hijack races to 12, I defend. We go heads up to a flop that I smash as it comes 10-7 deuce all black, giving me bottom pair and a flush draw. I check, and after hijack bets 15, I like to leverage the spot through a check raise to 50. Hijack needs more convincing as he calls, and force shoot comes to 8 of clubs. Great card keep barreling on, so I fire 100, and my opponent succumbs to the aggression this time as he folds. I table my hand to show that I was pushing a ton of equity, and after chipping back in the right direction, I get dealt another suited hand with queen 9 of diamonds. There's a low jack straddle to 6, and I raise to 20 from the hijack. I pick up 4 callers and we go heavily multi-way to ace queen 7 rainbow. Checks to me, and with middle pair, backdoor diamonds, and range advantage, I see bet 40. Only the button calls, and we continue heads up to a board pairing 7. Neither of us should have too many 7s, but given that my opponent called my flop bet, I'm assuming that I could very well be behind against an ace, so I check. After my opponent checks back, we go to a deuce of diamonds on the river. With my opponent checking back on the turn, I now feel like I could have the best hand. That said, I don't see a lot of targets I can call a value bet, and while I could potentially get a queen to fold a chop, I just decide to check and try to get to showdown. That is what happens as button checks back and I turn it over, and it's good. sure how to characterize that last clip, but let's just give my buddy Sneaky Pete credit for that being a dance move. But after missing the blinds, I pick up pocket 7s from the cutoff and straddle to 6. After 4 callers, I could just check and take a flop, but decide to juice it up to 40 instead. 2 early position players call, and we go 3 ways to 8-6-4 with a heart draw. Checks to me, and with my exact hand, I can definitely get behind a C-bet for denial and as a semi-bluff, but given that my holdings generally contain a lot of high cards, I take the deceptive route and check back. 4-3 comes aboard pairing 6, and this time Under the Gun leads for 75. Under the Gun 1 calls, and while I don't feel like I have the best hand, it's a decent price to draw, so I put in the 75 as well. Looking for a straight or slot machine on the river, it comes a 9 of hearts, leaving me unimproved. Both players check, and with my hand in this run out, I actually have a very good candidate to bluff, but shy away and check it back. First player shows ace-8 of diamonds to have me beat, and the second player tables 6-10 for trips to have us both beat. 7s were not so lucky in this one, but I look to get a dose of lady luck in this next one with pocket queens from middle position. There's a button straddle to 6, small blind and under the gun 1 call, and I raise to 40 from middle position. I pick up 3 callers and flop the nuts on queen jack 5 with a club draw. Checks to me, I bet 80, and only the button calls. We continue heads up to the 6 of hearts on the turn, which is a great card as I still have the nuts, and there are a ton of possibilities that my opponent can have that will want to see a river. I bet 190 with roughly 300 back, and my opponent calls once again. The river is good news, bad news as it comes a 9 of spades. I fortunately fade the flush draws, but no longer have the nuts as all combos of king 10 and 7-8 of clubs are reasonable holdings that my opponent can have. With 310 back though, I decided to go for it, hoping to target a hand like 2 pair, the case queen, or perhaps even a hero call from a jack. My opponent doesn't snap call, so that's great, and after a bit of deliberation, he makes a good fold. I then continue the trend of playing Broadway holdings, as I've got king jack of spades in the cutoff. Under the gun limps, middle position raises to 15, and I 3-bet to 45. Only middle position calls, and I smash the flop on king jack 4 rainbow. Middle position check calls my bet of 35, and I lock this one up with the king of clubs on the turn. After middle position checks, I look to feint weakness and check back. The river rolls off a jack of hearts, giving me a fuller house. Hard to get value, but the benefit of being in position comes into play, as my opponent takes a stab for 70 with roughly 300 back. My opponent probably doesn't have anything here, but in the off chance that he has a jack or ace high and gets sticky, I rip for the 370 effective. This hand would have been more fun if I didn't have it and tried this play, but I'll have to give that a try in a future spot. My opponent was essentially full of it though, as he shows an underpair that he was turning into a bluff and folds. Definitely don't fault my opponent for giving it a go, but after winning with queens and king jack suited, the run good continues in the form of pocket aces. The cutoff straddle is on, button raises to 20, and I repop to 75 from middle position. Only the button calls, and the flop comes king queen 3 rainbow. I c-bet 60, and the button calls. 4th street isn't the best card as it pairs the top card with the king of spades. I could continue betting to try and target a queen, but if I get raised, it could become a very expensive guessing game. That in mind, I check hoping to pot control, and my opponent fortunately obliges by checking back. River comes a 9 of clubs, which is also not a great card as my opponent can plausibly have jack 10, can go with a check and call most bets, or take the bet fold approach. I offer the latter to stay in the driver's seat, as I do have a clear target being a queen, and I bet 120. My opponent pretty quickly calls, I turn it over, and aces hold up as he mucks. With top of range holdings working out, I then look to replicate that success with a non-premium but good looking 8-9 of spades off the next shuffle. Small blind buys the button, and I raise to 20 from under the gun 1. Cutoff, button, and small blind call, and it feels like a crime to run this good at a meetup game as the flop comes 8-8-6 with a heart draw and giving me trips. After small blind checks, this is a board that I'll often miss, so I decide to check as well. Cutoff takes the green light at bet 60, the other 2 players fold, and I proceed with a call. 4th street comes a king of spades, and while I can mix in some leads on this card, I check hoping that my opponent fires another barrel. He slows down this time though, and the river comes a queen of clubs. I consider checking, which in hindsight might have been better to give him a chance to bluff with missed draws, but I bet 130 instead. Cutoff does end up making the correct fold, and I move over to the last table of the evening, in which I have spades again, this time with 5-7. I raise to 15 from early position, middle position calls, and then cutoff 3 bets to 45. After button calls, I come along as this middle position, and we go 4 ways to king 9-4 with 2 spades and a heart, and giving me a flush draw. Action surprisingly checks through, and the turn comes a 5 of diamonds, so now I pick up a bit of showdown value. Checks the middle position this time, and he fires 50. The other two players fold, and while there's merit to raising sometimes since I'm out of position, I opt for the conservative route and just flat. And given how the latter part of this session has gone, the river doesn't disappoint as I make a strong hand once again with the 6 of spades. I check hoping that my opponent will either bluff at it or perhaps value bet a weaker hand, but he smartly checks it back with 8-9 of hearts. And although there was no value to be had on the river, it's always nice to get there, and as the session comes to a close, I pick up ace-king once again. After 2 limps, I raise a 25 from middle position, and then the cutoff repops to 75 with roughly 360 back. Folds back around to me, and given that he started the hand with about 450, it feels kind of close between getting it in pre or taking a flop. In the moment, I opt for the former and rip for the 445 effective. My opponent doesn't think too long and calls it off, and I end up being in good shape against ace-queen offsuit, and let's take a run out. After getting a clean board to scoop this one, I take a bit over 2,000 into this last hand with pocket 10s in the cutoff. The button straddles to 6, small blind and hijack call, and I raise a 30. Button and small blind call, and we take a flop 3 ways, which comes ace 7-6 with a heart draw. Small blind checks, I down c-bet 35, and the button jams for 165. Small blind folds, and it's a pretty close spot, especially since it's not too much more. It's really just a matter of if I think my opponent has an ace or a draw. And while I am a calling station more often than not, I decide to let this one go. My opponent was nice enough to show the ace of clubs, so I'm glad to have gotten away from this one. Alright, just checked out of the hotel here in Napa. Where do I start? First off, just want to give a huge thanks to everyone that came out to the meetup game yesterday. Really cool to break that virtual barrier and get to meet people in person. That's always one of the most fun parts for me personally when it comes to this YouTube channel. And huge shout out to the staff that worked last night as well. Just everyone's super on point at Ace and Vine and just treats you with great service. Big thank you to Mark, the general manager, and Mike, the owner of Ace and Vine. They definitely hooked me up and put me in one of the nicest hotels I've ever stayed at. This is the Meritage out here in Napa. So just feeling tons of gratitude on this following day. Obviously having Cindy here with me. She's just hanging out here. Just a really great time. So as for the poker results, bought in for 500 originally and then added on 500 and ultimately cashed out 2,050. So book a win of 1,050. That makes it 2 in a row on the vlog. Hopefully that's a new streak that continues to go forward. As far as what's next in terms of vlogging, I don't really have any thoughts or plans, but if you guys want to drop a comment down below for some suggestions, happy to take them and see how I can maybe fit that in on a future video. And yeah, just one last thing to wrap things up. Big thanks again to everyone that supports this channel. It's just been a really fun ride the last few years, and having opportunities like this is just really amazing. It's a testament to kind of this community that has grown, particularly on this channel, and really you guys tuning into the videos and giving me this kind of opportunity. So anything I can do to continue to give back, I'll try to do my best to do that, to try to bring value to you guys with this channel. Please, if you're new, please consider subscribing, liking, doing all that good stuff. Continue to have this grow, and I can continue to do things more like this and not like this, but ultimately try to bring value to everyone that tunes into the video. So appreciate that. See you in the next video.